Hey there everybody, welcome to Cinema Recap. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 2020 American sci-fi drama Proximity. Spoilers ahead. We open up in Wrangell, Alaska in 1979 as Carl, a lumberjack, finishes work and is headed to the bar in town with his friends. While he's driving, his radio starts going off and he sees his friend being lifted into the air, causing Carl to stop dead in his tracks. When his friend's cars drop back down, he gets out and goes to check on him, but that's when Carl sees it, a UFO. Well, he runs, but unfortunately he's not fast enough to get away because that thing beams him right up. Now in the present day, Isaac's riding his bike down the street to NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California, where he's an intern. He walks in and greets his friends and then immediately goes to the computer where he logs in and decrypts an audio signal received from Canada, which they find odd considering they don't have satellites there. He intercepts it and sends it back out on their satellites, then they leave it and continue with their work. So burning the midnight oil, Isaac's attention is pulled away to the computer that tells him it has received a transfer. He inspects that file and finds it from an unknown origin, piquing his interest. During a therapy session, his therapist says that she can see him heal physically but worried about how he's doing mentally, and she suggests he starts a video diary for at least 5 minutes every day. She knows it sounds silly, but it's been proven to work, so she wants him to try it too. Isaac agrees and does as she requests. He doesn't really know what to do or say, but he says whatever he can. Now one day, while recording his diary entry, something falls from the sky and it lands close to where Isaac is. He runs to investigate the crash, and after seeing the immediate response of the military, he hides. As they roll up, he goes deeper into the forest trying to catch a glimpse, and that's when he sees the spaceship. He records it spinning just before he disappears. Little does he know there's an alien behind him. He turns slowly and it's standing there. He goes to record it just before it turns and walks away. So interested, he chases after it but is knocked out by an invisible force. Now it's been 3 days and Isaac awaits in the hills of California. He doesn't know what happened, but fortunately his camera's still there. He looks at the footage and sees his abduction. Isaac then realizes that his arm feels weird, so he goes home, and while sitting and digesting the events of the last few days, he sees his TV disappear before his eyes. Confused, he gets up and walks forward. His hands go through some type of force field. When his TV reappears, he's even more confused. He makes his camera do the same, disappear and then reappear. He tries to go to bed but struggles to sleep, constantly looking at his arm, so the doctor he visits tells him to just remain hydrated and get some rest. He then goes on to say that they found something strange with his arm, a perfect fracture. Now the doctor shows Isaac the difference between a normal fracture and the one he has, and when the doctor inspects the arm in question, he's amazed at the lack of scars. He tells him he's going to go review the x-rays a bit more and get back to him. So now Isaac returns to work and asks Beck if they can speak alone. He places a cup in front of Beck and tries to make it disappear. Beck watches confused until it actually happens, but he's confused when Beck isn't amazed, and that's because for Beck it's still right there in front of him, something he makes clear to Isaac when he grabs it. Even shows him the footage from the camera. Isaac learns that his hike wasn't the day before but rather 3 days before, information that he didn't know until now. He's not frustrated. He returns home, uploads some footage from the camera, submitting it to a website for space science. The video immediately starts gaining attraction. He wakes up the next day and gets a call from a station wanting to do a story on it. He goes online and sees the video has nearly 1 million views and his inbox is blowing up. He reads through the comments and they're split on authenticity. While most seem to believe it's legit, Isaac heads to an interview and tells his story of the alien encounter. The interviewer questions the convenience of the situation on him having a camera at the right place and time, but when the interviewer brings up his job, she questions if he just made it up on his computer. Given his unique skills, he tries to defend himself, but she ends the interview. Now the story continues, growing in scope and size. Most people in the mainstream media are calling it fake. The attention on Isaac is creeping into his everyday life, with the media following him looking for a new story to tell of the supposed alien abduction. Feeling alone in his experience, Isaac searches for stories on alien abductions and comes across someone who comments a very similar story to his. He messages the user who's asking to me. So now while waiting at the diner, he sees everything float around him but is then interrupted by the waitress who snaps him back to reality. He still doesn't know if what he's Seeing is real or in his head, and now Sarah, the original poster from the forum, arrives. At first she doesn't really reveal her story. She doesn't know if she can trust this stranger. He shows her the footage and then other evidence supporting the theory that aliens have been around for a long time, hiding in plain sight. She asks him if he ever heard about the abduction in 1979. He asks more about it. And she admits that she's foggy on the details, but says some guy in Alaska was abducted, and after Carl and his co-workers took a lie detector test, only Carl failed and he disappeared. The two end their conversation and Isaac gives her his phone number before she leaves. Now later on, Sarah calls Isaac and tells him about the story of Carl who was abducted in Alaska. He does a search on the name but can't find anything about him online. He asked for that scanned copy of the article she found. Then he hears the news talking about his video, calling it a fake, so he decides to send a bunch of outlets physical tapes, hoping to prove his story. Now while trying to mail these tapes, he's struggling to get him in the box, and a stranger comes and helps him. Now the stranger recognizes him and reveals he's a writer who also runs a blog. He'd love to help Isaac get that story out there, his version, not the twisted version the media is portraying. He gives Isaac his card and leaves. So at home, Isaac's looking at the card that the writer Keith gave him, and he takes him up on the offer and goes to his office. Keith suggests that if they piece together an article with his evidence as well as a lie detector test, then they'll have no choice but to believe him. He reluctantly agrees and Keith sets it up. Isaac takes the test, and once it's over, Keith leaves the room. Keith is then taken by the men in black. He manages to escape, but then they shoot him with a stun gun. Now Isaac's taken to a facility and strapped into a chair in a white room. They also have Sarah. The TV comes on and Agent Graves introduces himself. He tells Isaac they'll need to conduct some tests. A scale is presented on the other side of the glass and Graves tells him to focus on it. They monitor him as they switch out the objects. He asks where he is and where Sarah is, but Graves tells him to focus. Nothing significant happens with any of the objects. Graves asks what he knows of Carl, but Isaac doesn't really know anything about him. Graves tells the guards to keep monitoring them and they'll reconvene later. The moment Graves turns away, Isaac escapes, destroying the robotic guards. In the process, he goes and grabs Sarah and they run to the exits. Additional guards appear and fire lasers at the two. Isaac heads over and grabs one of the slain robots' guns and fires back. As they continue running, they get to a locked door and Isaac focuses on it and somehow manages to unlock it with his mind. The two escape and realize they're in Costa Rica. Graves tells his men to follow him in hopes that they lead him to Carl. Now the two arrive at a cafe and he tells Sarah they need to somehow find Carl. He asks a woman at the cafe where they can find a computer and she tells them to go find Zed. She gives the instructions, but he only catches snippets of it. His understanding of the language isn't that great. Now while they're walking to Zed's place, Graves searches far and wide for them both. The two arrive at a waterfront tavern and are directed to Zed, who's sitting on his computer. They go to him. He asks for their names and says that one lie and he can't help him as they're invited to sit and tell the story. Isaac sees the guards arriving. He tells them they need to leave and they all manage to slip out just in time. Then Zed guides him to his treehouse home. Now inside, he tries to jump straight to business, but Zed tells him to take a chill pill while he sets up Sarah and Isaac talk on the balcony, where she reveals that she already knew who Isaac was before they met up because of all the news coverage. She also tells him about her abduction story. The two bond over similar experiences, not just with aliens but with people in reaction to their stories. So they go back inside to see how Zed's doing. He's coming up empty, but Isaac remembers what he heard about British Columbia. They continue thinking, and then Isaac wonders if maybe those files he received at work from Canada were coordinates to Carl. They look them up, search the coordinates, and find a cabin in the woods in British Columbia. Zed finds a connection and they call him. When he answers, Isaac calls out to Carl, but he immediately hangs up. Zed says he can try again and bypass the system, so the call is answered regardless. They try it and make their way in. Isaac explains quickly in case he hangs up again. When he tells Carl he got a signal back, he interrupts Isaac and says he wants the data, so Zed takes over and gets in the NASA system to get that data for Carl. Sarah's confused as to why he wants the data, but Isaac thinks it might be something more than what he initially thought. It was communication from aliens. They dial call back and send the data and he reviews it. The audio tells them that the aliens are coming back and going to British Columbia in 5 days' time. Carl says to stay off the grid. Before logging off and shutting down now, Isaac tells him that they need to go to British Columbia, but Sarah's hesitant and he tries to convince her, saying he must go but he'd like if she went with. Well, she eventually agrees and Zed asks to join him, and thanks to Zed's understanding of the area they leave Costa Rica by land, sea and air. Graves knows they're going to Canada, so he calls the Canadian agents to be on the lookout for the fugitives now when they get to Canada, and take a train further into the country with agents on their trail and gaining fast. Isaac and Sarah talk. Zed is on his laptop when he finds a radar in the area that has signal tracking availability. He sees the agents on his laptop. He knows they're coming. They look back and see the agents boarding the train, so they get into a second cart and put on masks to confuse the robot's facial recognition systems. It works with the first robot, but the second one gets in Isaac's face before firing. Well, they run and get on the roof of that train. The one robot sees him running while the other goes after him, but then he sees his partner getting taken out. He goes to inspect, but Zed's waiting and kicks that remaining robot off the train. So the trio continue making their way through Canada, hitchhiking with a stranger, Zed keeping a close eye on where they're going and any potential agents chasing him. Soon they reach the cabin in the woods. Carl runs out with a gun ready to open fire. Isaac reminds him of their conversation and formally introduces them all. He asks if they deactivated their trackers, but they don't know what that means. He runs inside and grabs a device before coming outside again and deactivating them himself. Graves isn't too happy about that move. Now Carl explains that after he escaped he began looking for a way to make contact with the aliens. That's what Isaac was seeing at NASA. He shows them the audio he managed to get and what it translates to. He tells Isaac that what he got back was the most substantial response he's heard. After years of trying to contact him with Isaac's unintentional help, he was successful. Now they're amazed that he can communicate with aliens. Isaac asks what happened to him all those years ago in Alaska. Carl begins telling the story, a story they're all too familiar with, albeit a bit different to theirs. Through slight differences, they all sit around as a thunderstorm approaches. Sarah playing some music on Carl's record player, finding peace in the music. Meanwhile, Graves prepares a team to go to the last location of the fugitives, hoping to locate Carl. Zed is here looking around in amazement at Carl's impressive setup. He's impressed by Carl's knowledge, considering he was a lumberjack before the abduction. Sarah asks Isaac if he's nervous and he tells her no. She continues to ask if he remembers what happened back at the facility when he saved her and opened the door, like they were changed during the abduction to give them some abilities that they're not even truly aware of, and they continue talking on that before wandering through the forest and getting back to Carl's home. And when he walks in, Carl confronts him. He tells Isaac that they need a plan for when the aliens do come, as they might only have one chance and things could go either way. Now on the day of the arrival, they all wait for something to happen. The earth starts shaking and Carl says they're close. Isaac runs outside and the others try to stop him, but Carl tells him to let him be. Isaac continues running through the woods and then comes across an alien again. Now at Carl's home, the alien sits with a translator device courtesy of Carl to decipher what he's saying. He tells them all that they've studied a lot but desire to learn something beyond their understanding, the origins of the universe. The alien tells them that they'd like to ask a question of their own, and he places his finger to Isaac's forehead and asks who the man in the vision is, and Isaac asks why they're looking for him. Now the aliens believe he's a link to the origins of the universe, Jesus Christ. Satisfied with their answer, the aliens ask if they've got any further questions for him, and Sarah asks why their arms hurt. Well, the alien puts a bracelet on her and shows a separation of her arm to reveal a tracking device. He takes it back and grabs the one in Isaac before they can finish. Graves and his men arrive. Carl grabs his gun and sees the men outside his home. Graves calls out for him to exit the building, and he's grown more agitated before saying he wants to know what happened to Robert Graves, his father. It's a personal fight for him. He gives him a minute to exit the cabin, and Carl runs out with a gun and explains the story to Graves again, telling him he doesn't know what happened to his father. Unsatisfied with that, Graves orders his men to shoot, and they do. Carl drops to the floor. Sarah runs over to check on him, then Sarah's taken out as well. Now Zed's trying to escape, not looking to become next, and now the aliens finish with Isaac's arm, but before leaving they tell him to focus on his powers. The agents are shooting and Isaac sends out a temporal wave, slowing down time. He walks outside and grabs Sarah before disappearing. He comes back for Zed and Carl, taking them to another dimension where the aliens heal them. Now in their dimension, Graves is confused as to where they vanished off to, but now invisible they walk through the agents towards the spaceship, and Graves sees it taken off. 6 months later, Isaac and Sarah are now together and in love. Zed is working with Carl, running a